The diner was quiet that evening, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of cutlery breaking the silence. The air smelled of fresh coffee and fried food, the kind of scent that clung to the walls long after the customers left. Emma wiped down a table with slow, tired movements. Her eyes were heavy, evidence of another long shift stacked on top of too many others. She didn't have the luxury of rest. Rent was due in a week, and her daughter's school shoes had a tear she couldn't afford to fix yet. The door chimed softly, and she glanced up to see a boy slip inside. He couldn't have been older than 10, wearing a jacket too thin for the cold outside and shoes that had clearly seen better days. His hair was messy, his cheeks pale from the chill in the air. There was a look in his eyes she recognized all too well, a mixture of hunger and embarrassment, like he didn't want to be seen but didn't have a choice. Emma forced a warm smile and approached him. "Hey there, sweetheart. You need a menu?" The boy shook his head quickly, eyes cast downward. Just just some water, please." Her heart clenched. She'd seen kids like him before, trying to disappear into the background, hoping no one noticed they couldn't afford a meal. Emma knew better than to ask questions that would embarrass him further. Without another word, she disappeared behind the counter and returned with a bowl of hot soup and a small sandwich. She placed it gently in front of him, pretending it was just an extra order that needed to be eaten. "It's on the house," she said lightly before he could protest. "We had a little extra from the kitchen, and it'd be a shame to waste it." The boy looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment she thought he might cry, but instead he whispered, "Thank you." Emma just gave him a soft smile and patted his shoulder before walking away. She didn't do it for recognition or praise. She did it because she knew what it felt like to be forgotten by the world. She didn't have much, but what little she had, she gave with a full heart. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't alone in the diner. In the far corner, a man sat quietly, his presence almost invisible. He was dressed simply, nothing flashy, just jeans, a black coat, and a worn cap pulled low over his brow. But his eyes had been following every small, kind gesture she made. His coffee sat untouched as he watched the scene unfold, his mind racing through thoughts that went far beyond the simple warmth of the moment. He noticed everything. The way Emma's shoulders slumped when she thought one was looking, the exhaustion in her movements, and yet the undeniable kindness she still offered. She had nothing, yet gave like she had the world. And that boy, he saw himself in that boy. Years ago, he had been just like him, cold, hungry, and invisible to the rest of the world. The man didn't approach her that night. He didn't say a word as he quietly left a generous tip under his untouched cup of coffee. But in his mind, a plan was already forming, one that would change both Emma's life and the boys in ways they could never imagine. The next few days passed like any other for Emma. Long hours, aching feet, and the constant pressure of bills piling up in the back of her mind. The diner was her second home, even if it felt more like a cage sometimes. She kept her head down, worked hard, and tried not to think too much about how tired she was. Every extra shift was a chance to stay ahead, even if only by a thread. She didn't expect to see the boy again, but on a cold Thursday evening, there he was. Same worn jacket, same hollow eyes, standing at the edge of the diner like he didn't belong. Without hesitation, Emma waved him over. "Hey, you came back," she said, trying to sound casual, as if his return didn't break her heart all over again. "You hungry?" The boy hesitated, shifting from foot to foot. I, I don't have any money," he mumbled, eyes glued to the cracked floor tiles. Emma knelt so she could meet his gaze. "That's not what I asked, sweetheart. Are you hungry?" He gave the smallest nod. "Good," she smiled softly, "because I've got some extra pancakes the cook messed up, and they're just sitting back there getting cold. Think you could help me out and eat them so they don't go to waste?" This time, his lips twitched into the smallest hint of a smile, and Emma's heart warmed. She brought him a plate piled high with pancakes, syrup drizzled generously over the top. No questions, no judgment, just kindness. Unbeknownst to Emma, the man from the corner booth had returned too. He sat in the same spot, quiet and unassuming, watching the entire interaction unfold again. There was something about Emma's compassion that struck him deeply. It wasn't the kind of kindness you saw every day. It was genuine, unforced, and selfless. She didn't do it for recognition or praise. She did it because she understood hardship in a way only someone who had lived through it could. The man leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. He was a billionaire by every definition of the word, but wealth had never dulled his memory of where he came from. The struggles of his past still haunted him, the nights spent hungry, the constant fear of not having enough. Seeing that little boy reminded him of himself. And seeing Emma? She reminded him of the people who had once shown him small kindnesses when he needed them most. Those moments had shaped his life more than any fortune ever could. As the boy devoured his food, Emma slipped behind the counter and glanced at the clock. Her shift was nearly over, but her exhaustion weighed heavier than usual. Still, she found herself watching the boy, wondering where he would sleep that night, if anyone was waiting for him at home. She didn't ask. She couldn't. But the worry settled deep in her chest like a stone. When the boy finished, he looked up at her with something close to hope flickering in his tired eyes. "Thank you," he whispered again. Emma ruffled his hair gently. "Anytime, sweetheart." The man in the corner watched silently, his decision now clear. He wouldn't stay hidden in the shadows much longer. There was something about this woman, her heart, her kindness, that deserved more than just quiet admiration. She had given without expecting anything in return, and now it was time someone gave back to her. Not just gratitude, but something life-changing. And soon, she would discover that someone had been watching all along, someone who was about to change her world forever. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of day that seeped into your bones before you even stepped outside. Emma wrapped her thin coat tighter around her shoulders as she made her way to the diner, clutching a steaming cup of cheap coffee like it was a lifeline. The wind bit at her face, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The boy had haunted her all night. She didn't know his name, where he was from, or if anyone was taking care of him. All she knew was the hollow look in his eyes, one she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried. The world had been cruel to him. She could feel it, but the idea of him wandering those cold streets alone, it cut deeper than she expected. By the time she reached the diner, her heart was heavy with worry. She didn't expect to see him again. Kids like that didn't hang around for long. Life had taught them not to linger anywhere they didn't feel welcome. But something inside her hoped she was wrong. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside, and her routine kicked in like muscle memory. She prepped the coffee machine, wiped down tables, and forced a smile for the few regulars scattered throughout the booths. But that heaviness didn't lift, and then, as if summoned by her thoughts, the boy appeared again. He slipped through the door quietly, head down, shoulders hunched against the cold. His hands were buried deep in his too thin jacket, and his shoes were soaked from the icy puddles outside. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Hey," she called softly, waving him over to the same booth as before. "You're back." The boy hesitated for a moment, but eventually shuffled over and sat down. His eyes were tired, darker than they had been the day before. She could tell. Whatever had happened the night before hadn't been kind to him. Without waiting for him to speak, Emma brought him a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "No arguing today," she said with a gentle smile. "You need this more than I do." The boy stared at the food like it was a treasure before whispering, "Why are you doing this?" Emma sat across from him, resting her chin on her hand. "Because someone should," she said simply. "That's reason enough." In the far corner of the diner, the man was there again. His presence was quiet but deliberate. Every interaction between Emma and the boy carved deeper into his thoughts, stirring something within him that he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just charity, it was humanity at its purest, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He waited until Emma disappeared into the kitchen before quietly approaching the boy's booth. Sliding into the seat across from him, he spoke in a low, gentle voice. "Hey, kid, I saw how kind she's been to you. You're lucky to have someone looking out for you like that." The boy looked up, startled. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. Life had taught him not to trust strangers. "What do you want?" "Nothing," the man replied, offering a reassuring smile. "Just curious. What's your name?" The boy hesitated. "Liam," he mumbled. "Liam," the man repeated thoughtfully. "That's a strong name." Before Liam could respond, Emma reappeared, her expression wary as she noticed the stranger talking to him. Can I help you? She asked, her voice tight with protective instinct. The man stood, slipping a business card onto the table. Actually, I think I can help both of you. Emma stared at the card without picking it up, suspicion flaring in her chest. Who are you? He just smiled. Warm, genuine, but carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. Someone who's been where you both are. I'll be back soon. Just think about calling me. With that, he left, the door chiming softly behind him. Emma picked up the card, her hands trembling slightly as she read the name printed in bold letters. Her breath hitched. It wasn't just any name, it was the name. A man whose face had been on magazine covers, whose wealth was talked about in whispers and headlines. A billionaire had been watching them all along, and now everything was about to change. Emma stared at the business card in her trembling hands, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. The name on the crisp, expensive paper didn't seem real. It was the kind of name you read about in financial magazines or saw scrolling across the bottom of a news broadcast. Someone untouchable, living in a different universe entirely. Alexander Reed. The billionaire. The tech mogul. A man with more money than entire cities, known for his empire of businesses and investments. What was he doing in her rundown little diner, talking to a hungry boy and leaving her a card? It didn't make sense. Emma's eyes darted to the door, but he was gone, vanished as quietly as he'd come. She shoved the card into her apron pocket and tried to focus on cleaning up the table, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The weight of that moment pressed down on her chest, heavy and confusing. Who was that guy? Liam's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see him watching her with cautious curiosity, crumbs still on his plate. His eyes, usually guarded and distant, now showed a flicker of something different. Fear. Fear, or just uncertainty. Just someone passing through, she said quickly, trying to sound calm. The last thing she wanted was to scare him. Don't worry about it, okay? You finish eating. But Emma couldn't stop worrying. The rest of her shift dragged on like a blur. Every clink of a coffee cup or chime of the door made her flinch, half expecting him to return. But Alexander Reed didn't come back. By the time she clocked out, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones, and the weight of that business card burned in her pocket like a secret too big to carry. Later that night, after putting her daughter to bed and tidying up the tiny apartment, Emma finally sat down on the worn-out couch. The city lights flickered through the thin curtains and the quiet felt too loud. She pulled the card out again and stared at it. Alexander Reed, private contact. Personal line. A billionaire didn't just hand out his private number. Why had he been watching her? Watching Liam? What did he want? Hours passed before exhaustion finally claimed her, but even as she drifted off, that name stayed etched in her thoughts, looming like a question she couldn't answer. The next morning brought no clarity. She got up early, made breakfast for her daughter, and went through the motions of another exhausting day. But when she arrived at the diner, her breath caught in her throat. Parked just outside was a sleek black car, one that didn't belong in her neighborhood, let alone in front of the greasy little diner. The windows were tinted, and her heart clenched as she wondered if it was him. She stepped inside, and there he was. Alexander Reed sat at the same corner booth, dressed in a simple, sharp suit. Nothing flashy, but somehow more. He had the presence of someone used to owning every room he walked into, yet his expression was calm, almost gentle. Emma approached cautiously. Why are you here? Her voice was steady, but her hands tightened into fists at her sides. He looked up, offering a soft smile. To talk. I didn't mean to scare you yesterday. I saw something that reminded me of myself. If you. Him. He nodded toward the door as if expecting Liam to walk in again. Emma crossed her arms. You don't know us. I'd like to, Alexander replied, voice low and sincere. You don't owe me anything, but I think I can help. Both of you. Her walls shot up instantly. She didn't trust rich people with promises. They never gave without expecting something in return. And why would a billionaire care about a broke waitress and a homeless kid? He didn't flinch at her sharpness. Because I was that homeless kid once, and someone helped me when no one else did. Now, it's my turn to pay it forward. Emma stared at him, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. She didn't believe in fairy tales or miracles. Life had taught her not to. But for the first time in a long time, she found herself wondering, what if this time was different? Emma sat down across from Alexander, her hands resting stiffly on the table. The hum of the diner around them faded into the background as she studied him. Really studied him. His suit was tailored but not flashy, his watch expensive yet understated. But it wasn't his wealth that caught her off guard. It was his eyes. They weren't cold or calculating like she'd expected from someone with his kind of power. Instead, they were thoughtful, carrying the weight of something deeper than success. Maybe even regret. She cleared her throat. You said you could help. What does that even mean? Charity? A handout? Her voice was sharp, defensive, but beneath it was fear. Fear of hope, of letting herself believe in something better. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. No, not charity. I don't believe in handouts, but I do believe in second chances. Emma scoffed under her breath. Second chances? For people like me? I work 16-hour shifts and still can't afford my daughter's school shoes. There are no second chances for people like us. That's where you're wrong, he said calmly. You're working yourself to the bone, feeding a boy who isn't even yours when you can barely take care of yourself. That's not weakness, it's strength. And that's exactly why I want to help. Her jaw tightened. She wasn't used to compliments that didn't come with strings attached. Why now? Why us? Alexander's gaze didn't waver. Because I saw myself in that boy, and I saw the person I needed back then in you. The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. You don't even know him, she whispered. He shows up here hungry, cold, scared. I don't know where he sleeps or if someone's hurting him. I just try to make sure he's not hungry for one night. That's all I can do. Maybe it doesn't have to be all you can do, Alexander said gently. I want to help him. And you. A job opportunity. A way out of this constant struggle. Emma's head snapped back toward him, eyes narrowing with suspicion. What kind of opportunity? I own several businesses. One of them could use someone like you. Hardworking, dependable, compassionate. It's not charity. It's a real job with real pay, benefits, and room to grow. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. It sounded too good to be true. People like her didn't get offers like that without a catch. And Liam? She asked quietly. I'll make sure he's safe, Alexander promised. We'll find him proper care, housing, schooling, a future. But I need your help too. You're the only person he trusts. He won't accept anything from me unless you're there beside him. Emma stared at him, her thoughts racing. Everything about this felt impossible. People like Alexander Reed didn't just help strangers out of the goodness of their hearts. And yet there was something painfully sincere in his voice, like he wasn't just offering kindness, he was trying to repay a debt only he could feel. I don't trust this, she admitted, her voice low and shaky. I don't trust you. Alexander nodded slowly. That's fair, but I'm not asking for trust right now, just a chance to prove I'm serious. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Emma's entire life had been built on survival, on doing what she had to for her daughter, for herself, and now for a boy who had no one. Every instinct told her to run from this offer, from the vulnerability it demanded. But then she thought of Liam's hollow eyes, her daughter's worn-out shoes, and the crushing weight of barely making it every single day. Maybe this was the moment life was offering her something more. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady. One chance, that's all you get. Alexander's expression softened, and for the first time a flicker of hope sparked in her chest, small, fragile, but burning nonetheless.